to the Hope Report, your light in the darkness, brought to you by the Lindale Recovery Network. I am Jason Perry.
And I'm Melissa Hooray. It is Wednesday after having Monday off, and I just booked my trip to Johnson City. So I just hope that United Airlines doesn't do me wrong like they did last time, because I'm usually faithful to Delta, but I
Oh,
had to
man.
get there at a certain time, So United is the way I'm flying. But I'm excited
Well,
to come see you guys.
we're so excited to have you here. We're for those of you guys who don't know, Melissa's coming down to film some content so
It's
we
gonna
can
be
have
good.
a better intro and film some stuff that we can use to increase the production quality of the Hope Report. Right, you guys have been watching us for a while now. We're all on 4 Christian TV stations now. We're on social media everywhere, and with that comes responsibility, right? We need to really increase, I think, the production value where we can. So we're flying in my favorite cameraman, Kevin McRoberts from McPob TV. He's done
Yay.
all my stuff for Trident Shield and all the other high-end stuff that we've done. And so excited that he's coming. He's going to be here. Melissa's flying in, and we're going to be shooting all around the farm pound, the church pound, whatever you
A
want to
farm
call it.
pound.
Yeah, where we're going to be up at the cross and the pavilion, all around with all the animals and everything else that we got here. And then, doing some cool stuff. So I
Yeah,
can't wait to see how it turns out. I can't wait to hang out with you
me
and,
too. Can't wait to
have
see
some
your
fun.
family, see your
Yep.
sweet little girls, be part of the farm life, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to start getting cold here, so maybe there'll be better weather in your neck of the woods when I get down there.
I can
Nice fall
count
colors.
count count on it.
A little bit better.
I'm just hoping that that there's still foliage on the trees when you get here. They're still
Yes,
mainly green now, but we still have a lot of,
we have
we're
a
starting to get the reds and the
yeah,
oranges and the yellows,
yeah.
but it's still more green than everything. But it's taken this is my favorite time of the year here, and it's so great to get up at Warriors Rest Pavilion and Fire Pit up there on the mountain where we got 360-degree mountain views. And you're just looking out, even when there's not a fire, the world's on fire, right? Because of his hand and his
Yes.
creation. And all the Cherokee National Forest is lit up right now with the foliage and all the surrounding mountains. It's just amazing.
Yeah, your property and everything looks just beautiful from everything I've seen on social media. I feel like I've been there, but it's going to be completely different experiencing it just real time in person. But it
So
looks gorgeous.
did you see that
The
Lauren?
pumpkin chewer.
Yes. So there's a chicken challenge out there right now for everybody who wanted to decorate their place, for the fall. We went out and got a bunch of pumpkins and creating some bales of hay that we had in the barn. And Lauren made this beautiful little scene on our front step,
Oh, it looked great.
and
Awesome.
our chickens couldn't leave that alone. So next thing you know, within 24 hours, giant holes in the pumpkins, and then did you
Yeah.
actually see Anya
Yes.
chewing
That
on? Yeah, like
Emmy
that.
loved that. She was absolutely delighted by that. I showed
Yeah,
it to her too.
yeah. So the chickens were bad enough. Our 9-month-old decided to crawl over there and take a bite out of a pumpkin, and we're just like, why even bother? Right? Why even bother?
Well, you're
So,
teaching her to love the fruits of the land
yeah,
instead of the garbage you
yeah.
get, you know, the other stuff she could be eating. So
Yeah,
good on
exactly.
her.
So yeah, raw pumpkin. She dove right in. I think that girl would eat anything. Like out of all the kids I've ever seen, her palate is the broadest. Meaning she is just so happy that anything edible gets put in front of her right now.
Well, that's
So
awesome.
she's
She's not picky, not a picky kid.
yeah,
Nice silver lining. Yes. Yes. Squash and pumpkins are some of my favorite vegetables.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, we're also planning our spiritual warfare on Halloween event
Yes.
here soon.
Oh, I wanted to
So
tell you, Jason, on that note, is that we have a great guest on Halloween. We're having Wendy Lowry's ministry partner. Her name
okay.
is Tatiana. The woman is incredible. She prays every night for hours. She really is one of those people, kind of like the Apostle Paul. She's single. She doesn't have children. She's devoted her life to the Lord and interceding for people. And
Great.
so I'm really excited to have her on Halloween. I thought it just worked out that way, but it was
Yeah.
a divine appointment for sure.
So we are, people have a lot of opinions on Halloween. We're not celebrating Halloween, but we're not surrendering it either. So we're going to be the beacon
Right.
of light in our neighborhood. And people are going to come to this house and they're going to hear Jesus music cranked. They're going to see everything Jesus, everything here. And we're going to be sharing the gospel with people. Where else on what other day of the year does your ministry come to your house and knock on the door dressed as
Yeah.
devils and the undead and all these things
Right.
for them, right? What else does that easy mode come to you? And instead, too many Christians want to shut the door, retreat, and give that night to the enemy. And I'm saying, no, we're going to be a beacon of light. We're going to have a party here with a bunch of people celebrating Jesus, everything biblical, and we're not going to let the devil have 1 inch.
I told Emmy about that. So my 14-year-old, she's not interested in, well, I don't know, she might hang out with her friends, but the 12-year-old still wants to go trick-or-treating with dad and was kind of wondering how I'm going to perceive that. And I said, Jason says we need to take back ground for the enemy. I told her that. I said, we need to make it for Jesus, make it about Jesus. She didn't quite get a biblical costume, but I'm going to tell you what she is and see what you think about it.
Oh boy, here we go.
No, remember, it's going to be cold here. So we probably by the end of October, we'll be wearing something heavy underneath the suit. So it is not any kind of skimpy costume. It's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. It's kind of cute. It's kind of cute.
A demonically possessed marshmallow. Yes, you crushed it.
Nobody's smiling. He's a happy marshmallow.
He's a happy demonically possessed marshmallow man.
She wanted to be the Pillsbury Doughboy, but she couldn't find one. So this was the next best thing. I thought I'd tell you that live on the air and see your response. A happy, smiling, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Could be worse, right?
It could be worse. It could be sexy vampiress.
Or the sexy little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah, I mean, it's so disgusting when it's done, which is why we got to show another option, right? So for example, I think like our 2 kids are going to be farm animals, right? We're going to have.
She was a cow last year.
A cow, or a bee said she wanted to be a chicken, and I'm probably going to be a centurion,
That's
whatever, maybe Cornelius. I'll have a little C. Whatever,
That's
somebody,
a good one.
People
will be like, "What are you?" You'll have to explain them and tell them explain it to everyone. Tell them the whole story.
Yeah, either that or I'll just slap that on right there, that Crusader helmet, and call it a day.
Yeah, there you go. That's
it's a real helmet. It just wouldn't be very comfortable. My nose is too big, so to be squashed.
It looks pretty cool.
It is
I'd
really
like to
cool.
See that.
Yeah, it's got a little thing on the inside. It's really cool. Just I don't know how they fought back then. Your field of view, like I'm used to fighting on night vision, which gives you a nice little circle that you can see. Now the ones they have today, after you zero dark 30, you practically got 360-degree heads up display. But back in the day, we had a circle, and these are like this.
Wow,
right? And it's
unbelievable.
Like those guys, like, and then not only did they do that, they did it in the desert. Right? The Crusades went into the desert in metal. Like those guys must have cooked. I can't even fathom how miserable that must have been. And that's coming from a soldier. So, so anyways, well, the rest of our weekend is we're preparing for our 2,000-pound potato harvest next week that we use to feed our community. And
now's the time.
And we also have our 100 chicken culling harvesting we're coming up on in a couple weeks as well, where we're going to be processing 100 chickens.
I thought we were only doing that once a year. Is this
starting next year? Starting next year, we're going to do it once a year. So we did 50 and now we're doing 100. So we're going to have about 900 pounds of chicken here.
Wow.
And, we've already started, offloading some of it. So,
have you had a good response? I mean, that's so incredible that you're offering free range chicken to people.
Organic free range chicken.
Yeah.
And then we got the eggs that we're doing as well. We're doing, Lauren does homemade raw ice cream.
Was it pumpkin spice? Did I see that?
She did pumpkin spice the other day. She was more of a fan of it.
How did that turn out?
It was good. It was good. Pumpkin spice is good, but for me, it's not one of my faves. I love her coffee ice cream, but she's also doing whole raw milk. She still has yet to perfect mozzarella cheese.
it probably tastes really good, but it's if
Yeah,
I
the
remember
texture's
right,
been
it's
off.
the
Yeah, she
look or
struggled with the
something.
texture. Yeah.
That would
So,
be challenging.
yeah. So Lauren said, she's like, wait a minute. I thought the plan was to do smaller batches as needed.
Are you
That might
changing
be
the
what we do
plan?
going forward. Who knows? I just know that 50 chickens was a lot of mess. I can't imagine what
Oh
100.
yeah. Yeah, I can
Holy
imagine.
smokes. So, anyways,
You guys are gonna get really good at it before long. It'll
well,
just be
yeah, and
like
then we were
riding a
going to be,
bike.
we're going to harvest bacon soon. Who's our biggest pig, coming up
It's
here in the
gonna
not
be
too
a
distant
little
future.
hard. I bet they're
I
more.
like bacon. He's got a lot of personality, but
Yeah,
I like to eat bacon more
I
than I
like
like.
bacon more, real
Yeah,
bacon.
I like real bacon more than
Yeah.
I like bacon, right? So knowing that Bacon had a good run and he's had a great life back there, and he's we're going to be looking forward to that. And then I pick up 2 more pigs tomorrow. These are Berkshire heritage breed pigs that are really known for their buttery flavor. So
Ooh.
between our 8 cows, we have 6 calves coming, so that'll be 14 cows, right? We'll have 6 pigs, and they have litters. We're expecting 2 litters sometime. Holy smokes! I just vanished, but I'm back.
You
Okay.
did? I didn't see
Yeah,
it.
I blacked out on my screen for a second.
I,
And then we'll have like the pigs usually have 6 to 14 in the litter, so we're gonna have
wow.
like so many animals here next year. It's really gonna be cool.
It's
But we
gonna be
got,
quite the farm.
and then on November 12th, we have 3 work crews who donated their time, heavy equipment and materials and skills, and they're coming to clear a perimeter around the whole property, right? And they're building. We have a milk station. They're framing in and covering Lauren's milk station so that the weather elements there, and putting in a sink and all that. And then they're also building a steel processing cage so we can string up 1,000-pound bull on there and carve
Wow.
it up when we need to. Yeah. So a lot of stuff going on.
You're gonna be fully in business after all that. It'll be kind of running running
with
itself.
prices going what they're going, we're trying
Yeah.
to be part Noah's Ark here, right? We're trying to make, or
Yes.
part Joseph.
You've done a lot in a short time. I mean, you've done an enormous amount of work.
Once Ukraine kicked off, we decided to go all in
Yeah.
and make sure that we could provide for the community around us, because there's not a lot of money around us. You're going to see when you get here, Tennessee's not like Virginia or anything. It's more like northern Maine,
Appalachia.
where yeah, exactly, like northern Maine, where Travis, our next guest, is coming from. You'll have trailer, brick ranch, mansion. Trailer, brick ranch, mansion. There's it hasn't been gentrified yet for 50 or 60, 100 years. So there's a lot of people on the fringes that are really struggling. And these, every one of us is paying $8,500 more just to live this year.
Mm-hmm.
8,500. Imagine if you only make 30 grand.
Right. Yeah. I don't know how people do it. People that are barely getting by with gas prices doubling and inflation and interest rates and everything that's going on. I don't know.
This is our chance for the church to be a part of the solution in people's lives, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to go to Haiti. You don't have to go to Haiti.
I know that's
you don't have to go to wherever.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have to send people all over the world to do this stuff. We got poor, hurting people right here at ground zero, and you can be the tip of the spear right here.
Well, Wendy Lowry, I know we got to get to Travis. Wendy and I are going to start doing some street outreach under Rafe's leadership with his new church, Truth and Freedom, but here in the suburbs. Here, like you said, even in the suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul, there's a couple churches here that have started taking in homeless people. So there's a large population of people out, panhandling, needing stuff, but just giving them some little bags of essentials and hygiene items and things like that, and witnessing to them and sharing the gospel with them. That's what we want to start doing.
We often race to the bottom because we have the most leverage with people who have nothing, right? Yeah. So if they don't have water, we give them water. Yeah. They don't have food, we give them food. So there is a point there. They need something, so they're willing to do stuff. But we need to contend every square inch of this country, which means, you're going to have to bring the Lord to people who don't need you, right? They need Jesus, right?
Yeah,
so anyways, let's bring my good friend. I miss this man and an awful lot. We used to hang out in the gym at Ken Graves Calvary Chapel in Bangor. Him and his wife are true lights in the world. They're just really salt of the earth people, and they're a husband and wife team that runs a church in Portland. And I can't wait to get him on, because we had him on once and there were some sound issues, and his testimony is one of the most powerful. Yeah, you weren't there that day.
Oh, I wasn't?
That day. No, you were off that day.
Are you kidding? Why did I forget that? Well, now I get to hear the whole thing in real time.
Now you get to hear it. So let's bring on Travis. Now he's not in his dad's basement on a Wi-Fi with a tiny thing. He's in his awesome church. So without further ado, welcome Travis.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. Good to be here.
We can't hear you.
Travis. Travis, no. You sound great, look great, background looks good. We had a few probs, but we got it going.
Yeah, I promise. We have technology and internet here in Maine, so we're proving it now.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad, because when we were looking for houses there, finding high-speed internet was a challenge. So it must be better in southern Maine.
How long did you guys live in Maine, Jason?
We were there for about half a year. It's about as long as we could last without our house selling, because we were having to pay rent and a mortgage, and it just got to the point where we ran out of funds. And then next thing you know, we come back, we say we're going to Tennessee, and we sell in an hour.
Must have been a God thing.
Yeah. So anyways, Travis, thank you for coming on. I'm so glad you made time for us here.
Yes.
We've been looking forward to getting your story out to more people, because it's really, a lot of people, when they say they hit bottom, and it's an average bottom. Your bottom is so deep, and you had a champion for Christ fight for you. Yeah. And I just want to show how much of a difference, because it's a guy that both of us love dearly. And, I just can't wait for this story to come out. So Melissa, go ahead, take it away.
Oh, it's great to see you, Travis. I have the Bible. I'm in front of it. The Bible Maddie made me is behind on the shelf here. And I love it. I love your story. I watched a few testimonies on YouTube of you giving your story, and I have a lot of things I want to ask you. When you're talking about the pastor that came to visit, was that Ken Graves? I don't want to get ahead of the story. Oh, it wasn't. Okay. Oh, it was. Okay. Wow. Awesome. So I'm really excited to put all these pieces together, but I know you described, well, why don't we start off by, do you want to start off with the hopeful piece, Jay, the way we always do? Okay. Yeah. Just tell us what you're doing today, a little bit about your ministry, your church, the recovery program, who the Redeemed Travis is. And what's your
website, so I can pull that up for everyone?
And your family. Tell us about your family, some of the hopeful stuff to start off.
Well, I appreciate the kind introduction by both of you, because I mean it when I say I was a loser for like most of my life. And when I say loser, I mean I was a liar, a thief, just, manipulation and just everything that sin had become in my life. By no means a testimony of my mom and dad. I grew up with a wonderful mom and dad, but just a loser. So now serving in the ministry, having the privilege of pastoring the church that me and my wife planted 2.5 years ago, Calvary Chapel, Greater Portland. And the website, Jay, is greaterportland.org. So serving the role of senior pastor here, awesome. Which is just a wonderful thing to see the word of God go forth into a community and seeing hearts and minds change for the light of the gospel. And, before serving in this role, I spent several years on staff as an assistant pastor with my mentor and my father in the faith, Ken Graves. So it's been a blessing for 6.5 years serving in pastoral ministry. My wife, who likewise was saved out of a life of addiction, she serves as one of our worship leaders here at the church. And we have 2 beautiful children.
Beautiful pictures.
Marley, they are twin 3.5-year-olds, boy and girl. So the contrast in which Jesus Christ and the Spirit of God has demonstrated in my life and in my wife's life, it gives such glory to God.
Wow, that's incredible. Oh, that's amazing. So encouraging, especially you and your wife together doing this. What a kingdom couple. What a testimony to what God can do with a surrendered life. It's really beautiful.
So one of the things that was funny is, I go to Maine, I meet Ken, I meet Travis, and they invite me to come work out in the gym. And like my whole life, the gym has been a dude environment, right? It's been an all business dude environment. And I show up and Travis's two twins are there and there's kids in the gym. And I'm like, what is this? This can't be. This.
Yeah, my wife was in a women's prayer meeting, and gotta take
dude environment. I love it.
I'm like, you are violating bro culture right now. What's going on?
But you know what, Jay? As you would agree, that is such a testament of Pastor Ken and his ministry, knowing that there is no delineation between ministry and family and hobbies. Jesus Christ, when he is the Lord of our life, he's the Lord of our family's life. He's the Lord of our hobbies, our activities. And Pastor Ken is just led by example of realizing that serving Christ means our families serve Christ. And we go that day wherever God would have us, which may include 7:30 a.m. workout and fellowship with some other men.
Exactly. So my camera's having some issues, so Melissa, take it away.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I know. I'm gonna fix my camera. Something's going on with my USB port, so go for it.
Okay, sure. So I got introduced to Pastor Ken Graves a little bit through Jason, and I've followed some of his sermons. He seems like such an amazing guy, and I love Jason's stories about how he was looking for that type of a pastor, like a manly guy that wasn't a beta male and had calluses on his hands, and how he really just connected with him. It sounds like he was a huge figure in your life as well.
Ken would, absolutely. And he was my neighbor. This is the divine sovereign hand of God, because Ken was my neighbor when I was in 7th grade, so I remember when the lumberjack preacher man moved next door and, his family was one of, 7 or 8 families on the hill. So everyone just quickly got to know each other. So, and he's always been that. Ever since I was a young kid, I knew Pastor Ken was a man's man who preached and believed and lived out what the Bible said.
Yeah. So you've lived in Maine your whole life. You grew up in Maine, right? And you've been there.
I grew up in Maine. Yeah. I definitely spent some, I lived in California for a while in the Marine Corps. I lived in Texas, a lot of that season of my prodigal years, trying to really find an identity outside of Christ, trying to, do what the world said was successful and going in that route. I spent a few years living outside of Maine, but predominantly my upbringing, and then of course these last 8 years serving the Lord has been right here in my home state.
Yeah, I learned so much from your testimony, and I related it so much. I grew up in the Northwoods of Minnesota, I live in the Twin Cities now, but I grew up between Duluth and the Iron Range, so not far from the Canadian border, way up there in the north. And
Iron Range, man, this sounds like something out of the Lord of the Rings.
Hey, no, it's
right by Mount Doom in the Iron Range.
Taconite. There's a lot of natural resources up there. There's a lot of natural beauty up there too. And the politics actually are more conservative up there than they are here in the metro area. But it sounds like you had this all-American childhood where you had great parents. You said they're still married. That you had a twin brother and another set of twins, which blows my mind. So four boys in your family.
4 boys. So, and all within 3 years of each other. So mom and dad, there were 4 babies in diapers. 4 of us were in high school at the same time. So, and yes, my mom and dad are still married, and by the grace of God, both walking with the Lord.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, so, yep.
Praise God. That's so great.
Yeah. If I could, because I was dealing with this.
Step in, jump in.
People like Travis and Ken are so important to veterans and first responders to have masculine pastors up there showing what a Christian man should be, right?
Yeah.
And so often, again, I struggled for years even after being saved, meeting these beta mush males in sweater vests and who went from school to pulpit, right? And they don't have that real life experience in there. And it was just like I said, when I saw Ken, I was just like, oh my God, this is exactly what I need. I can be a dude. I don't have to walk around like this and talk softly and just be a shell of a man. I can be a robust, manly man and serve the Lord. And the answer was a resounding yes. So And it
Yeah,
was-
and let me just say, Jay, I
Mhm.
think God makes all of us unique, especially men. I mean, the personality spectrum that I will steal this metaphor from Pastor Ken. There is the spectrum on one end. There's the Mr. T. On the other end, there's
Yeah.
Mr. Rogers. But I don't. It's not the
That's good.
personality. It's more of Jesus Christ was the most manly of men. I mean, and by that I mean he was a man of conviction. He was a man of truth. He was a man, yes, of meekness. He had self-control, which I think any
Mhm.
mature man must have. But he was a man of duty, and he knew that his will was not his own, and that's what made him such a man's man. And that's what I believe: individualism, courage, bravery, valor, all the attributes that men in our nation once had. That is now being robbed from them because of this woke moving towards
Mhm.
mass conformity. And so
Yeah.
Ken is definitely on the Mr. T end of the spectrum with his personality, but way greater than that, he's on the Jesus end of the spectrum of a man who has duty and conviction and stands for truth
and grace.
and grace. Well said.
Yeah. Yeah,
Perfect package.
I've just never seen a man with so much grace, and that was,
Mm.
the hardest thing to take away from him because was seeing how much grace that he walked with and how much he forgave and just
Yeah.
moved on and all that stuff. And it was, and of course Travis's story ties into that. So
Mhm.
Yeah, and in hearing about your life as a kid, it sounds like life was good. You were in a lot of sports and academics were going well. I didn't sense a lot of, or maybe this was just the interview you were in, but did your family go to church? Did you have any exposure to God, or how were your parents back then as far as faith?
So my mom has been a Christian as long as I've been alive. I think my mom would be the first to admit that the terminology would be she was a baby Christian. In other words, she was a born again believer who knew the importance of church. That was about it. But she knew enough to drag the four of us, and at times I mean drag the four of us to church. So my father was a moral man, a hardworking man, a loving father, not born again. I truly believe he did the best with the tools he had, but my dad was not a born again believer. So my mom would drag us to church. Sometimes my dad would come, but I give so much credit to a pastor who all those years ago expositionally preached the Bible. And this wasn't Calvary Chapel. This was just a small little country church outside of Bangor, Maine. And Pastor Roger Tracy was preaching the truth. And as a 13-year-old kid, I heard the truth. I knew the terms of God, and I knew about heaven. I knew about hell. And I knew how to get to one and avoid the other. So the upbringing I had concerning faith was that small window of being in middle school and being dragged to a church where the Bible was taught. And then, of course, once high school comes, my mom made the four of us get jobs early. We were playing sports year round. So church very quickly fell to the wayside once high school came.
Yeah. It sounds very familiar to me. I had an exposure to the gospel, and I went to church, like you said, with my parents. But once I became a teenager, I didn't have any kind of discipleship to anchor me to it. And I had, like you said, heard the terms. And I'm really grateful for that now, because I see how God, like Jason calls it, God's breadcrumbs. But I'm grateful for every church and every pastor who spoke into my life back then, even though I went off on the course of addiction. And it sounds like then you just started to kind of slip into what people were doing and drinking, smoking pot and that sort of thing. But it didn't seem to derail you a lot at first.
Yeah, I think definitely my mindset was not at the time a big derailment. Looking back, the term marijuana a gateway drug, it so is. Alcohol a gateway drug, it so is, because it just opens up the exposure to all these different influences. Because at that point, me personally, and I think so many others, you so badly just want to fit in. You want to fit in. No one wants to be the outsider. No one wants to be the bottom rung of the social class. And, in 2001, I was a freshman. 2005, I graduated. So, 20 years ago, still then, it was, what were the high school jocks doing? What were the popular kids doing? They were going to parties and smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol. So I definitely thought, as you just said, Melissa, I didn't think it was derailing me. I thought it was just an experimental phase. But I can tell you, looking back, there was such a huge derailment. There was a path that it sent me down.
Yeah, we could park here for a little bit and talk about this. I think this is so important for people who may not have heard us talk about this. the reason why it's so powerful to the pull to experiment with drugs or to do things illegal, it's so easy to fit with the outcasts or fit in with people who you're sharing risk with, right? It's no different than a military operation, except the military operation has some nobility to it. But when you're doing something illegal with someone, drugs or alcohol or skipping school or whatever, you're sharing in that risk and in that conspiracy, and it kind of makes you tighter, if you know what I'm saying. It really does give you this false sense of community, right? And there is, well, it's actually not a false, it is community. It's the drug community. It is the fallen community. And that is, people want to fit in so bad. Like, here's Travis. He's a big guy. He's a good looking guy, all these things. And he still felt the pull to try to fit in. And then when you're in a group where the cool kids are doing that, and it's not the stoners, right? Because some people, they have no hope. They're awkward. They have no hope of fitting in. So what do? They go to fit in with the stoners and the outcasts, because there's inclusion in that right away by sharing that risk and doing those drugs and doing those things. But even for the rest of, for everyone else, if that is part of the culture that you're in, whether it be that school, that community, that group, that friend group, it is almost overwhelming to withstand that. And here's the thing that I want to contrast that with today. Travis went down a dark road and Melissa went down a dark road with alcohol and drugs and whatnot. Now with fentanyl, people don't get a chance to go down a dark road. They try it once and they're dead, right? So it's like the days of being able to experiment, if they were ever here, are not now, right? Now, one mistake and your kid never wakes up. Right. And not only that, the person who's doing CPR on them might not wake up.
Yeah, really shocking and hard not to see that there is an intentionality behind it when we find out where most of this fentanyl is coming from, when we find out that they're purposely, coloring it like Skittles, when they're taking, I started my opiate addiction with oxycodone pills, 30 milligram oxycodone pills. You're now seeing these pictures of all these drug seizures, and they're getting all these pills that they are stamped and meant to look like something that they are not. Yeah. So, you're
taking a Valium, you think you're taking a Valium, or you think you're taking an oxycodone, and you're getting fentanyl instead.
You're getting fentanyl. Yeah. So it is mass murder, and it is, no doubt China being one of the number one distributors of it, coming through the open door that Joe Biden has done on our southern border. So it really is shocking to see. And you're right, Jay, there are so many young people who are, they're not even going down the road of addiction. They're experimenting 1, 2, or 3 times, and boom, their young life is finished.
Yeah. So, 9/11, I think 3,000 plus people died in an attack in one day. Fentanyl killed 70,000, I think I heard yesterday, in 1 year. Now, we lost 119 or 109,000 people to addiction, but fentanyl itself killed 70,000 people. That is mass murder on this scale. And the fact that that's not on the news every single minute of every single day, right, is a disgrace, and it shows you how deliberate it is, and it shows you how corrupt our politics are and our media, because they are all owned by the same people.
Yeah, 2021, 303 people per day died of drug overdoses. That would be like a 747 crashing every day out of the sky.
Wow.
For drug addiction.
I remember you saying in that interview, like you're saying you tried the oxycodone, or you did alcohol, weed, tried cocaine, got introduced to oxy, and the consequences were veiled from you. And I felt that way too when I started drinking. My dad was an alcoholic, but I just, innocently, I found belonging in a group of slacker people who drank a lot. And I had a brain that was genetically primed for alcohol. And for me, alcohol gave me an opiate-like high, because I was a very fast metabolizer of it. And there's some science behind this, but about the metabolizing of alcohol, allowing toxic byproducts to get to your brain. So I would get this euphoria, like you talked about too, not like normal drinkers, but this opiate-like high. And I'm wondering, at what point after you're using opiates, did you realize you were addicted, or that, hey, this has crossed over that fine line from having fun with it to addiction?
That's a good question. The light bulb that went off in my head, I remember it so clearly. And there's so many seasons of my life because of drug addiction that I don't remember things. There are just certain seasons that were like a blur, but some things just stick out. And one of those, I was a freshman at Maine Maritime Academy. So I was 19 years old. I'd actually taken the year after high school off. My twin brother went right to college. I took a year off, and it was in that year working in the restaurant scene that I was introduced to oxycodone, cocaine. So I'd been using pretty heavily what I thought to be recreationally. And then I went back to school with a lot of pressure from my mom and dad saying, you know, you got to do something. So I followed my brother down to Maine Maritime Academy, which was a military regimented school through the Coast Guard. And I was maybe a month there in school and just began to realize that I would get these real severe back and body pains. And the light bulb one day just went off in my head. I realized that these body pains would suddenly go away when I, would sniff an oxycodone pill. So I'm a slow learner, I guess. It took me about a year of using recreationally before I realized I am physically addicted to these at 19 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of the things that we like to point out along down the roads is if there's a fork in the road, right? Your fork in the road as you started doing alcohol and you did this. How do we protect our kids from that? And of course, you're going to say discipling, right? Because you were a church light at that time. You were going, you heard it, but you weren't discipled. That identity in Jesus Christ wasn't passed down to you. Would you agree that? So someone else right now who's raising their kids and they're getting ready to go into high school, how would you recommend that they not go down the path that you did?
It is 100% spiritual. When I say spiritual, it's a biblical illiteracy problem in our young generation, because prevention education, the DARE program, remember DARE? I don't even know if they still do it. Yeah. I was getting that at 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. And some of those were graphic. I mean, videos of morgues with toe tags on those who died from overdoses. Some of that stuff kind of shocks you as a young kid as you're listening to it. Prevention education was not going to be, and it wasn't for me, a big enough deterrent. What it has to be is a spiritual issue, which one, when the Bible is opened and taught, we realize who we are, that we are not some evolved animal, that we're not just some, conglomerate of cells that happened over 600 billion zillion years, that we are actually the workmanship of Jesus Christ, made in his image. We find out not just who we are, but we find out what went wrong. We look back at the garden and we find that sin was introduced. There's a separation between us and our creator. And, all these fundamental foundational truths of humanity that are dealt with through biblical discipleship. So no doubt those formidable years of a 10, 11, 12, 15-year-old boy or girl, those are the years that you really need to be imparting these spiritual and eternal truths to people. So, I'm grateful for the gospel that went forth on a Sunday morning for a 13-year-old kid, but I needed men or women in my life that were coming alongside, so to speak, and demonstrating what this meant to live a life contrary to the fallen world.
Yeah. One of the people that I've done a lot of reading about was, Voddie Baucham and others like him, where they highlight, biblical mentorship and how we have so broken apart with that, particularly in the church, where we take a bunch of kids and we put them around a bunch of other kids that are like age, and we expect them not to be to like become Christian warriors that way, right? Yeah. It's about being around older, mature men, right? In most other biblical cultures, you wouldn't put kids, which are fools, with other fools, because what you're going to get, fools, right? You take kids, you put them around men, and those men mentor those kids. And that is something that I feel like we have done way too much, in the church and in our lives as the heads of family. Your parents need you there present daily, right? You can't outsource that to a coach.
Yeah, and I appreciate Voddie Baucham, a good preacher, and I get that sentiment. I believe, is there a place for a youth group? Absolutely. Is it good to get people of like age together and instruct Bible to them and make healthy friendships? Certainly. I don't think that should take the place of, one, a traditional church service. I think these young men and women need to be in the church service with the rest of the church family, especially if they are of the age of being able to understand. I'm not saying that you can't have a nursery or a children's ministry. But two, I also think that when you have a healthy body of believers, a healthy church family, there are things that are going on throughout the week that you want to see. And by the grace of God, we've seen here at our church here in Portland, Maine, we are seeing these dads show up to men's prayer, men's conferences, church work days. They're bringing their young teenage or even preteen boys with them. And that's what needs to happen. You can't just expect 1 hour a week at a youth group to be enough for our children to grow up and, like you said, be warriors. They need to be seeing, and that's what Deuteronomy chapter 6 says, right? When they wake up and when they lay back down, everything needs to be not just instruction, but demonstration.
Yeah.
Instruction and demonstration.
And that's sorry, go ahead.
No, you can finish your thought. I cannot.
I just remember Ken saying this to me one day, no matter where you are, and in leadership, this is part of it. Oftentimes you're going to learn more what not to do than to do, right? Meaning that there's going to be an example of don't do that, right? Mm-hmm. So Ken offering correction, driving cross country with Ben, who's his son, and having secular radio on and say, why isn't this okay? Right. And breaking down the words and using that, right. And using that as contrast learning, because you can't just leave discipling to, hey, it's 2 hours on Sunday. Right. It's got to be there when you're in traffic and someone cuts you off and what you say matters. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the world isn't taking days off. The influences that are coming in from, and how much more Jay and Melissa when we were younger, now with the Snapchat and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and who knows what else, the influence that is just continually before young people's faces. To think that 2 hours or 1 hour a week in church with a youth pastor is going to somehow stem the tide of the world's influence, it's foolish.
It is. I just want to, along those lines, that question was posed to you in that interview I listened to about addiction, and the world often wants to know this. What do you think causes addiction? What can we do to prevent it? And I liked how you said, I thought it was really profound. You said addiction is a symptom of a deeper issue. We need God, we need a purpose, we need identity in Jesus Christ. And that's what's missed so frequently in a lot of treatment programs, is that they look at treating the symptoms rather than looking at what's driving it and the emptiness that comes from a lack of identity in Jesus.
Yeah, listen, the Lord Jesus never in the four Gospels, and neither did the apostles in the New Testament, they weren't going around telling people in the city of Athens to repent from their heart disease or to repent from their cancer. No, they were telling them to repent from their drunkenness, from their pharmakia, from their sexual immorality. It is a sin issue, and it has been one of the greatest lies and most dangerous threats perpetrated on the American people that the insurance agencies have tried to claim. They've successfully claimed addiction as a disease to make tons of money. But what a lie. It is not a disease. You could go as far as to say that sin is a disease in the sense that we've all been bitten by it. But to try and blame this on some genetic disposition or this is something that you're born with and you just got to deal with it. No, it is a sin issue, and we must rule over it. That's what God said to Cain. Sin lies at your door, but you must rule over it. And we have the power of the Holy Spirit to do so.
Amen.
But if it's a disease, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
So now I'm just a victim.
And I'm going to relapse because relapse is part of recovery, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's such garbage. And I've debated this with loved ones until I'm purple in the face, saying that, you don't choose to get cancer in most cases, like, pancreatic cancer or something like that. Now you can smoke cigarettes all day and increase your chances of getting lung cancer or anything like that. That's a disease, right? There's always one sin pattern or many sin patterns that will lead to the addiction aspect of it. So anyways.
I'm so glad you said that. I just did a short video about, it was called Addiction is a Sin Problem. Jason said this many times. We have guests who have said this, and I got not a moderate amount of pushback, which isn't surprising, but we're conditioned to believe that we should not tell an addict that they need to repent of their sin problem. And that's where it starts. We have them look at treatment programs and meds and Suboxone. I know you talked about that in your interview as well, which I really thought that was incredible. You went through withdrawal in jail. You didn't have a methadone maintenance program, right? You didn't substitute another drug for your opiate addiction.
No, but let me tell you, at the time, so in bondage, I so badly wish I had methadone or Suboxone in jail, but by the grace of God, I didn't, because I had been on Suboxone for years. And it was such a crutch because, it would keep the withdrawal symptoms at bay. But anyone who's been on Suboxone or methadone, most would agree, you can then put that aside for a while, go on your heroin bender, and then the moment you start having withdrawals again, go back on your Suboxone. You can sell your prescription on the black market, make money for your heroin. And I did that for years. And Suboxone, it's like hospice care. It's like, hey, you're always going to be this way. So
You
nailed it.
is. That's good. That's so good.
Terrible.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Let's get back. Jay, let's get back to you. So you were at the academy, and then at some point you left, and you decided to go to the Marines.
Yeah. Well, I had been dipping class. Once I had that epiphany in my head that I need to, be getting these pills every day, so I'm not sick. Well, Bangor, where my supply was an hour away, one way. So, as a 19-year-old kid trying to travel every day to class, then back to Bangor for drugs, I quickly realized this isn't going to work, and I'm borrowing way too much money on a loan to do this. So I left halfway through my sophomore year. I did 3 semesters and left, and really had this sit down with my mom and dad. You might say like an intervention. They knew something was up. I don't think they fully understood, but they knew something was up. And as a kid, and Jay probably can identify with this, I always wanted to be in the military. I mean, I would ask my mom and dad every Christmas for a ghillie suit or military face paint, or, that was just my life. I had all the Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, Marine Corps posters in my room. But, that kind of, the dream died with addiction.
Yeah.
And now at 20 years old, coming out of college, dropping out of college, it seemed like a viable option now. Okay, you know what? I can get away from this mess I've made. And that was the decision made with me and my parents. Went and saw a recruiter in the early months of 2008. And, I have mixed feelings about the recruiter. I was very honest with him and my situation, and he just kind of made things happen to get me into the military. So I went in April of 2008. I enlisted in the Marine Corps and did my 13 weeks of basic. At the time, it was 13 weeks. I don't know if that's changed. I did 8 weeks of infantry training, and I was in a 6-week light armored vehicle course in Camp Pendleton, California. So I'd almost a year away from addiction, away from drugs, not realizing that, again, the root issue had not been dealt with. And so all I needed was access again to opium, which in California, it wasn't hard on a weekend liberty, hanging out with old buddy again. That's what Marines do, right? Or, you train hard, you party harder. And it didn't take long before I was introduced, this time on the West Coast, black tar heroin, instantly overdosed. I don't remember a lot about what happened that night. Woke up in the Naval Balboa Hospital in San Diego, and they're putting 2 and 2 together. This guy's got dog tags. He's here for a heroin overdose. That began the process of military separation.
Wow.
Yeah, and we talked about this with somebody else who was in the military recently. We had a Christian rapper on DCure who was in the Air Force, and his problem was alcohol, and the military is much more forgiving in that. But the Air Force went above and beyond and went all in on him to try to save him. And I've seen the military take, people that I thought were savable and just throw them out and get rid of them far too soon. I'm not saying that's the case here. Obviously, heroin is illegal in so many things. You have a lot of different things in there, but I have seen them cannibalize, and I have seen us eat our own far too much. I'd like to see them do more to invest in people and pull them out of this. So, obviously, being in the military, you're at Balboa, so they only bring military people to Balboa. I know Balboa very well. And how did your family? Actually, one thing I forgot. I remember this in your first testimony. What went through your mind the first time you tried oxycodone?
So now, 18 years old is when I was first introduced, and that was when they still had the 80 milligram OxyContin was the name brand. That was, Purdue Pharma. They've been in a lot of trouble since, but that was the first introduction was 18 years old. I'd already been dabbling in cocaine pretty heavily. And I remember it was a long night of cocaine use, and we were on our way back from Massachusetts with a guy who introduced me to all of it. And we had been doing cocaine all night, and the big fear was coming down off of it, right? That just dreadful, painful, wide awake experience. And he said, "Hey, try this." And he took that pill and snapped into a quarter, broke it in half, broke that in half, and just gave it to me. And I ingested it just, orally. And within half an hour, I was in dreamland. It was, the experience and the euphoria was overwhelming. I instantly came off of the cocaine crash into this warm feeling of pleasure sensation that was enough for me to say, I could do this every day of my life.
Yeah, that's of course what I wanted to get. Yeah.
The lie, of course, is every time you do it,
it's going to feel just like this.
No. You think it's going to, and it doesn't. And this doesn't take long before you're just using to try and feel normal
to survive. Yeah. Try to feel normal. Yeah. When you met with that general where you were trying to go through the process to redeem yourself or stay in the Marines, it sounds like you did that you went through the chain of command to try to plead your case. Is that what happened where you were like trying to stay in, but then that's not how it worked out?
I remember they called the program retention. Retention was anyone who was going through whether Article 112 or whatever the separation was. Mine was Article 112. It was drug use. There was an option where we could, I guess, contest it. And truthfully, I was with a lot of guys, and Jay gets this. A lot of guys get into the military, they realize, what did I get myself into? And they'll purposely fail a drug test or go UA, AWOL just to get kicked out. There are some guys like me who just got in trouble. So I was one of a few that actually tried to go through that retention process. And I think we went from a captain all the way up to a 2-star major general. And I remember it was Major General Lenhart. And I went all the way through this process, and having recommendations from some of the staff sergeants that in that time were still training us, and we were going through things, trying to prove that, hey, we want to stay in. And I went into the office of that 2-star major general with 2 staff sergeants on my left and right, with the intent of them being recommendations or references for me. And I didn't get more than 3 words out. That 2-star major general, he told me as it was. He said, "We're fighting a war funded by heroin, the Taliban." He goes, "And you are using heroin on the weekends. I have no place for you in my Marine Corps." And he signed my papers that day. So ended pretty quickly.
Wow. I can't imagine what that must have felt like when you had to call your parents and say, "Oh, I'm coming home now. I'm coming back to Maine."
Yeah, just humiliating, and a lot of that really was, I think the reason why some of it was so humiliating is because I was still so concerned with the world and what others thought. That, the fear of man is a snare. And so many, I just wanted to, prove that I wasn't a loser. I could, I was going to have a career. I was going to be successful. I was going to do what my high school friends did, my brothers were doing. And getting kicked out of the military just meant I had to, start over again. So, it could have been a tool spiritually for me to hit my knees and cry out to God and say, "All right, Lord, I'll serve you." But it wasn't. It was a tool to just say, "All right, let me try rebuilding on my own foundation again."
Yeah. Well, and everyone would think that this would be the end, but it gets worse.
Yeah. Unbelievably. Yeah. A lot of time passes before you stop.
Yeah. I mean, my 20s, I think I was 21. I think 21 when I was discharged from the Marine Corps. And I went into a faith-based discipleship program for a couple of reasons. One, I really wanted to get back to the military, and I was receiving counsel from different people that, you could get your discharge expunged and you could go before a naval review board with the Marine Corps. So I was kind of desperate. I wanted to get back in the military. So I thought, well, maybe if I do some program in a sign of good favor, maybe that'll change it. So that was one reason why I was willing to do the Teen Challenge program. But really the other reason, and I saw the Lord's hand in it, was my mom's good friend, the one who led my mom to Christ all those years ago. She recommended this program. Said, "Why don't you send Travis to Teen Challenge?" So I get out of the Marine Corps, come back to Maine, was there for a month before I get back on a plane and go to San Diego for the Teen Challenge, 16-month Christ centered discipleship program. So I spent a year and a half
Wow.
really being discipled. Teen Challenge has got a good reputation as part of the Assemblies of God Church, and the Word of God was opened and taught to me. I met some good friends, but I think this is so vitally important because even in that environment, and even being surrounded with Christian fellowship, there was an unsurrender. It was the motive was, I'm doing this as a stepping stone to get to what I want. There was no
Yes.
lordship of Jesus Christ in my life. And even though at the time I wasn't thinking that,
Yeah.
I don't think I didn't have such a process of mind thinking, okay, I am just doing this as a stepping stone. But looking back, it was unsurrender and still having Travis as the Lord of my life.
Yeah, you said, I want to just share this quote. I mean, we could print this on a t-shirt. It was such a good quote. You were talking about how you didn't surrender. And I did that too, where I had 2 DWIs in 1 year. And because I was afraid of going to jail, I went to treatment. It wasn't Teen Challenge or anything as structured as that, but I went to AA and got a sponsor and did all that stuff. But in the back of my mind, I knew that I was, it was like sometime in the future when my life settles down, I'll be able to do this again. And it was all stepping stone for me to get what I wanted. And you said, if you live for yourself, you're a slave to yourself. And it sounds like you were still in that, where it's like, well, I'm not surrendering this. I'm just trying to get my life back in order and get what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. The old Christian hymn that has been misinterpreted from the book of Genesis, old Jacob's ladder, just one rung at a time. We're climbing. That's not what Jacob's ladder was. Jacob's ladder was the bridge, which was Jesus Christ. Yeah. And so, we think we're just climbing up the best we can, and we're going to do it with all these good steps and around Christian people, but it's a works-based religion. Yeah. And those, even in Christianity, they find themselves in that. And, Paul the Apostle has to say that to the church in Galatia when he says, you guys have fallen from grace. In other words, you've abandoned the economy of grace and you've gone back to works. You are so foolish. And that was what I was doing.
Yeah. So I just want to ask one more question about Teen Challenge. It's not always easy to get people to commit to that. Typically they want to do the shortest route they can do. Like maybe I'll do 30 days, but you must have been pretty serious about proving yourself to the military or whatever your, motive was. What was there anything missing from the program? Did you have moments where you felt like the Lord was reaching you or the Holy Spirit was speaking to you, or did you just kind of go through the motions?
No, I have a lot of positivity to say about that program because the word was taught to me, Old Testament, New Testament, and it was demonstrated by the staff members there. So it was a wonderful experience, and the Lord used all of that. Even as scripture memorization and knowledge of the Bible. Years later, when I finally would hit my knees in a jail cell and surrender my life, in God's kindness, He can still use those years that the locusts have eaten. Amen. For His good, and so all that stuff. I think that probably played as to some of the quick growth that then happened after my surrender because I had this base of knowledge. And so, the only thing I would say was one, the first parable Jesus teaches, the parable of the sower, and he talks about those 4 different soils, those 4 heart conditions, 3 bad, 1 good. It is a mysterious thing that God deals with the soil of our heart. And there's truly nothing we as humans can do to affect it. I think we've all been one of those 4 soils. And, the only thing that we in the parable are called to do is sow the word. The sower sows the seed. We're not called to shoot the birds of the air or pull up the thorns. No, some plant, others water, God gives the increase. But my point of saying all that is I just was not ready. I was in a season of life where I still had a lot more dying to do. And so I don't put any blame on anyone other than I was still a young 20-something-year-old kid trying to make an identity of himself. And the word of God was being sown, and God would use it years later, but I just wasn't ready.
You were still a knucklehead.
Makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you go through this Teen Challenge program, and you were in California, and you returned to Maine.
I I returned to Maine in 2011, and because of my season at that Maine Maritime College, my brother, who had graduated a year before and was working in the industry, he set me up with a job interview that I otherwise would not have landed, and did okay in the interview, enough to get hired as a consultant of this company out of Southern Maine. So, again, playing into the carnal flesh of trying to make an identity, I'm moving home from California, getting this consultant job, and we began to, it was a traveling job. So I would work from Maine 5 days, for 5 days in Maine, 9 days in Texas, 5 days in Maine, 9 days in Texas. And we're doing a petroleum walk down of this big company, walking down their oil batteries and satellites. But that job just began to make things spiral because I'm getting paid good money. I had this false sense of security that I'm doing okay in the world. And that was in the season where I had gotten the Suboxone prescription. And so I know I've missed a step. I know I didn't explain my relapse coming out of Teen Challenge, but it didn't take long. I left Teen Challenge, got into other sin, sexual immorality and whatnot, and that soon led me back to drugs and alcohol. So when I was working this job as a consultant, I was really I was spiraling, but I was hiding it well because of the career.
So when do the wheels come off?
I lost that job in, that would have been 2013. I spent 2 years on that job. And it was there that I, for the first time, went into Pastor Ken's discipleship program back in my hometown of Bangor, Maine. And I'll preface by saying I did 3 attempts. Attempt number 1 and 2 were absolutely terrible, infamous, you might say. Attempt number 3 was successful. I did my first attempt in Ken's program in 2013. I lost that job. I lost another relationship to a lady I was engaged with down in Texas. Came back to Maine into Ken's program. And, the Calvary Residential Discipleship Program, it's similar to Teen Challenge in the sense that it's Christ-centered. It's the Word of God. There's a couple things that I think really make CRD stand out. One, it's under the umbrella of the local church. Other than a para-ministry like Teen Challenge, it's not under a local church. So it's a little bit more of an organization. So when guys or gals get out of Teen Challenge, to some degree, they don't really have a great network of staying plugged in. Under the local church, you're there part of a growing, healthy body of believers, people who have no drug addiction issues whatsoever, but who are living out their faith. So that was huge. It was, the program is housed right on the Calvary Chapel Bangor campus, as Jay knows. He's been there. And 2, I think the model that Pastor Ken has set for the staff members and the elders that trickles down into the program is doing life daily with disciples. And by disciples, guys who are 1 day, 1 week, 1 month clean and sober, who are a total mess as I was, and just doing life with them. You're doing Bible studies and in church services, but that's just a fraction of it. You're also doing hard work. You're doing free time. You're in the weight room. You're in car rides. You're doing life with men like Pastor Ken and just seeing what a life surrendered to Jesus Christ looks like.
You're learning work ethic and you're learning value.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of these guys did not have a great dad like you did. A lot of them, some of these, Ken's the first father they've come across, really, real dad. And, that's why it was so powerful seeing what he did there and, rolling the work stuff in. A lot of the treatment programs, you're the patient, you're being served.
Yes.
And
right.
it's not that way
No.
with CRD.
That's so important.
And
The
then
work
that peer
part.
pressure comes in. If you're lazy, the guys are going to call you out on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We weren't sitting in circles talking about who wronged us and why we're drug addicts.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we love the Salvation Army so much too. I mean, the rehabilitation program, the work to live there. I mean, you're not just going to hang out in your room all day and go to groups or talk to a therapist. You're going to have a purpose. You're going to be engaged in the community and give back to it while you're there. I think that's so important.
Absolutely.
So there's a couple things I want to hit, with your story. One, so here you are, you're seeing it, how it's supposed to be done. This is the end of the story, right?
Yeah, compromise, man.
Yeah, it's a spoiler.
Lots of compromise, and that is the deal. We are, currently right now as a church family here in Portland, we are beginning the book of Numbers. We've gone through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and now we're in the book of Numbers on our Wednesday night. That's what we're teaching tonight. And interesting to see what God does in those first 4 books of Moses. One, he talks about the election, the calling of Abraham, which would be the patriarchs. Second thing, Exodus, he talks about redemption, being saved out of bondage. Third, Leviticus, it's a book of worship. It's how to approach God and service to God. The 4th book, Numbers, is a book of warfare. The very first chapter, he lines them up and say, count how many men you have to go to war. And they're probably thinking, war? We're former slaves, we're shepherds. It is a picture of our Christian life. God, he calls us, we're elected. He saved us from our bondage, like in the books of Exodus. We're called to be worshipers of him. And then we're called to a fight, warfare. And you look at the New Testament, all the language that is used about the enemy and the battle and the shield of faith and the wrestling that we deal with. And I believe there was just so much of my young, ignorant Christian life that I didn't take serious the warfare God has called every Christian man and woman into. That if we're just standing still, we are losing ground. There is a current of this air. So I think Christianity was fire insurance. I believe the Bible. I was grateful for the good news of the gospel, and I would identify as a Christian. But there was no engaging in the fight. There was no daily discipline. There was no surrounding myself with like-minded men and women. Other than what was forced in a program, I was always seeking out those who weren't doing well. There was still this part of me that was seeking pleasure and fun, and I wasn't taking serious the spiritual warfare that we as Christians are called to.
So when you washed out of the first time at Calvary Chapel, what was the cause of the first time that you washed out?
Drug use, and that began with getting into a relationship with a female that was not my wife. I was not married. I hadn't been married at that time, but just I don't want to be a drug addict. I don't want to be a junkie, but I kind of want to date the world the way the world dates, and so I was always falling into some sort of sexual sin. And by the time you're living in a habitual state of sin, then you've numbed yourself to the conviction of the rest of God's word. And it didn't take long to get right back on a drug. So I was asked to leave the first time because I was back on heroin and lying when being confronted about it. And the second time was no different. The second time I was there for a week, withdrawal symptoms kicked in, and I said, screw this, I'm out of here. So my first 2 attempts were just full of compromise.
So let's talk. I think this is really important because a lot of people have stepped up to the plate multiple times and failed, and their loved ones lose hope. They lose hope. What changed between your second and your third? And I think it's important that we hit your bottom,
Sure.
right? Because I think this is the moment where I think all the fire alarms went off in your head, and you realize, where you were like, I'm a piece of garbage and I need to fix this. But go ahead. I don't want to steal your thunder. So you wash out the second time, take us from there to your third, and then that's when this story takes off.
I washed out of the program 2 times. Ken then graciously let me live in his home. And I don't know what that conversation must have been like between him and his wife, Jeanette. So gracious.
Wow.
Ken, and he referred to it as the special ed program. He goes, Travis, come do the Peter, James, and John program, right? Peter, James, and John, who were close to the Lord all the time because they were special, and Ken, but you know what? The same thing. I after 2 months of living in Ken's home, got caught lying, stealing, trying to fake a drug test. So at that point, it was the summer of 2014, and I was in full-on rebellion. To everything. I was convinced I was going to die a heroin addict. I was convinced that the gospel couldn't even save me because I tried it, didn't work, and it was just in the grace of God that my rabid state, just like Saul of Tarsus heading to Damascus, was interrupted, and it was interrupted because of a robbery charge. And I was making bigger and badder plans. None of them would have worked, but in my crazy, rabid condition, I was going to rob a bank or do something foolish. And in the meantime, I was just doing petty crimes in a local Walmart, just trying to get my fix. And me and another guy, a former Marine who was also strung out on heroin. Me and him in October 2014 went into a Walmart and attempted to steal a lady's purse from her shopping cart. In the process, she saw us and grabbed onto me and his, shirt jacket. We wiggled out of the jacket and ran away, not knowing the manager of the store had got in the car, followed us, called police, and then, about 7 state troopers met us about 3 or 4 miles down the road. So that, what would have been a theft crime of stealing a purse, because there was physical encounters, it went all the way up to a Class A robbery, which is a pretty serious crime. So October 26, 2014, my Damascus road was I was apprehended, which is unique because Paul the Apostle in his testimony in Philippians 3 says that he was apprehended. And, likewise, I was apprehended by the law, and it was very gracious, because that really just stopped my downward spiral of destruction.
Wow.
So you were rescued, which we've heard that term before,
Yes.
by law enforcement in this time. But I want to get into the mindset, right? Because again, every one of us has people. I've lost my little brother to heroin, and he went through countless programs, and other people did other things and all that. That there is something that is very different with your story than most people, right? Most people they burn everybody around them and they're done. They cut off and they're done, right? But here you are, you just purse snatched from like an 80-year-old woman.
92.
Right? 92,
Oh.
okay. Right.
Yeah.
So here you are, you're a big, strong Marine. You just purse
She was
snatched
tough.
from a 92-year-old woman. You're in the paper. This is in your hometown, your family.
Wow.
You've shamed your whole family. You're in prison or jail, whichever. I don't know which one. You're in
County jail. Yep,
county jail. And one person doesn't give up on you. You want to talk about that?
Mm.
Yeah, if you've ever been to county jail, any listeners, the visiting program, you got to go through a little bit of a process. You got to get the paperwork from one of the administrators. You got to send it out in the mail saying, hey, I would like so-and-so to come visit me. You then send it out in the mail once you first get money to get a stamp. Then that person has to sign it, agree to it, send it back. Then it has to be approved. I mean, it's just this big process. And that includes a mom, dad, spouse, anyone. I hadn't done any of that. I was so dope sick. I got arrested in the midst of my addiction. The first night I was, extremely sick. By day 4, I was miserable. And I got a knock on the cell door from one of the corrections officers saying, Carrie, you have a visitor. So I, kind of peeled myself off of the bunk, went down the flight of stairs. We were on the second story where we were all housed, went down to the first floor. And when I came into that visitor room, behind 2 inches of visitor glass was Pastor Ken Graves, wearing his leather jacket and a Bible sitting on the table and big smile on his face. And I wept immediately. Good night. I wept. Yeah. And met with Ken. And, at that point, Ken knew that he didn't need to give some sermon. That wasn't why he was there. It was so Christ in him, just kind of extending the hand of saying, you had enough yet? So that was the offer from Ken. So he said, listen, whether you do months or years in jail, however this, legal process unfolds, he goes, you're welcome to come back into the CRD program. So pretty gracious, considering I had made just a complete mockery of it the 2 times before. So that was Pastor Ken's visit in November. Yeah, it would have been around the 1st of November, 2014.
Wow, 8 years ago.
Yeah, that is the part that I think is so different, because again, I've had my heart broken. I know other people are more like, we're done. And Ken didn't compromise, and Ken doesn't enable, right? And that's the difference where he came to you. It was, are you done? But he was there to show you the light out, right? There you were in the 9th hill of hell, in prison, in your, going through your withdrawals, and there he meets you at point of contact, right? Yeah. And that is what's so powerful about it, and saying, you're welcome back when you're done with this. After you deal with the consequences, I'm not going to try to get you out. I'm not going to do whatever. Whether you do years or months, we're here for you when you're ready.
Right. I mean, the Son of God said that he came to seek and to save that which was lost. In other words, Everyone knew that was the complaint about Jesus, was he dined with sinners and tax collectors. Well, he wasn't partaking in their sin. He was working as the sin doctor, the great physician, calling lost people into a right standing relationship. But he was with the lost. Pastor Ken, Christ in Pastor Ken, surrounds himself with the lost, not compromising or participating in the sin, but calling them out of that lifestyle. And that's something that Christ through Ken has done so incredibly for the 40 years of his ministry, is dealing with people like myself who the world has cast off and saying, listen, I see where you're at. You're ready to start training now, aren't you? Hey, follow me. And here's the invitation. Follow me as I follow Christ. So it is a profound truth that like you said, Jay, I think has been lost in mainstream evangelical Christianity here in America, because a lot of ministers and pastors, they just want the big lights, they want the big crowd, they want the great sermon on Sunday morning, but not willing to get in the trenches with those who are hurting.
Yeah, and that's the part
Well
that I think
said.
people don't understand is like Ken did that after Travis was in his house and betrayed him in his own house, right? Like
Wow.
that is the depth of love that this man has, that he will not give up fighting for you.
And
what makes me,
can I say something? Let me say this.
Go for it. Yeah.
My second time in the program, before I left after that 1 week there, I went into one of the assistant pastor's offices and rummaged through the drawer and found an envelope full of money. Took that money. And everyone knew it was me. They couldn't prove it, but they knew it was me. By the grace of God, I got to make all that right. But when Ken came to visit me, I hadn't just made a mockery of the discipleship program. I hadn't just spit in his wife's face by what I did in their home, but I stole money from the house of God. So all of that, and Ken still saying, hey,
showed up.
Like,
wow.
That's when I said grace, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Right. And I got to watch you preach, and at Calvary Chapel, and I got to see Ken kind of see that final transition for you into that role of, man of God up there preaching from, to God's people. And what I saw in his face was breathtaking. And, I just, I want people to know that this story ends well, and, please wrap up how blessed you are, in the last bit that we're together. But just to say that this is the power one man can make when he doesn't give up, and where grace abounds more. Right.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of people, Jay, as I wrap up here, I know we're short on time. A lot of people, sadly, within the body of Christ, you'll hear Christians, brothers and sisters say, I can't forgive myself. How could God ever use me? And, trying to be sensitive to that, I still think it needs to be said, that is such a cop out. It's an excuse because, for instance, Paul the Apostle in 1 Corinthians 15 would say, I am the least of the apostles because I persecuted the church. He goes, but by the grace of God, his grace in me was not in vain, and therefore I labored more abundantly. He says, because God forgave me so much, how could I not labor in the gospel more than others? And so when we've been forgiven so much, and we're aware of how much we've been forgiven, which we've all been forgiven an immeasurable debt, how can we not be motivated to serve him more? I mean, forgiveness is the very heart of the gospel. How can we reject forgiveness, even if we're rejecting the forgiveness of ourselves? So I was so aware of what Ken had given me as an opportunity. I was so aware of the grace of God in my life. I was grateful that I still had some brain cells left, and I didn't reproduce kids somewhere in my addiction, that I wasn't part of their lives. God was gracious through a lot of my addiction. Hadn't been married or divorced. So as I, got out of the program that third time, did the 1 year school of ministry through the years of 2015 and 16, which is just a leadership role over the discipleship program. I then met my now wife. Maddie was a student of the women's discipleship program. She comes from Chattanooga, Tennessee, down near where Jay and Lauren live, and former heroin addict as well. And she had gone through the program, the School of Ministry. And it's like what Pastor Ken has so often said, God put Adam to sleep. When he woke up, there was Eve. And Ken likewise says, we get busy just serving the Lord as single men. And God will just bring that lady right to your left or right. You'll be serving the Lord and look, and there she is. That's what happened with me and Maddie.
Mhm.
She was on fire for the Lord. She was serving in different capacities, leading worship and doing some of the young adult study. So we got married in 2017, and Pastor Ken graciously, with some of his networks and friends around the nation serving in the ministry, he gave her and I an opportunity to go do a pastoral internship in Hawaii. Someone had to suffer.
Yeah,
Lord.
Wow.
All right, I'll go.
So I want to interrupt here just for a moment because there's a part that's missing that just because I know so much of your story. Pastor Ken in his discipling of both of you, because he was, he played a role both in your and your wife. You guys were having an interest, and didn't he pump the brakes on you guys and and say, hey, yeah, you guys are not mature enough yet to do that. Do you want to talk about that? Because I think that's really important, because you guys might have totally gone a different way. If go ahead, you tell it better than I do.
Yeah, well, I mean, because Maddie and me, we both had a story. We had a life, an adult life, before we got saved and were walking with the Lord. So she had a past, I had a past. We've done relationships only the wrong way every time up until that point. So there was a healthy reverence her and I each had for this courtship, but there was also a heavy, set of accountability by Ken and the pastors and elders, as well as the ladies that were discipling Maddie. So it was kind of like, stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. You can see each other. No, you can't see each other. You can hold hands. No, you can't hold hands. No, and we knew enough that we were just going to trust the leadership that God had put over us, because they had proven to only want the best for us. So at one point, the leadership decided, you know what, we think maybe this is just moving kind of quickly. We're going to ask you guys to do what Abraham did with Isaac, which is lay the object of your love down on the altar. That was the words they used.
Woo.
On the inside, I was kicking and screaming. On the outside, I said, you know what? I trust these people. So we did 4 months. Maddie actually went to California from Maine because she was enrolled in the Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa School of Worship. So she went out there, and I was still actually finishing up my 1-year school of ministry back in Bangor. And we did 4 months. We didn't talk one time. We trusted. We didn't, no pen pal, no text messages, no nothing. And towards the end of that time of our 4 months, Pastor Ken approached me and heard that Maddie was coming home to partake in a wedding, and said, she was going to be one of the bridesmaids at her friend's wedding. Asked if the Lord had still made it clear that Maddie was to be the one I would plan to marry. I said, absolutely. And he says, well, you have my blessing. So, and then, I think 4 months later we were married. So it didn't take long. So, but I'm glad you brought that up, Jay, because, the 6 pillars of ecclesiology, what is church in Acts 2, verse 42, verse 44, is it was the apostles' doctrine. In other words, there's leadership. God, leadership and structure is something that is God's idea. There's leadership in the home, right? The man of the house. There's leadership when the families get together. There's the pastor and the elders. And, I believe we can't say we're going to submit to God and not submit to God's people. And, so I really am grateful to have seen godly leadership, to trust it, and obeying it, and seeing God bless our obedience to it.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, I can save it for the end. Go on with your story, Travis.
No, so to pastors out there who may want to intervene like Ken did, there has to be a supreme amount of trust and credibility if you're going to be inserting yourself in people's relationship. And Ken had done the time with you and earned that to be able to step in and do that. I just want to put that in there. If you go around start trying to, if you don't walk it out, you don't have the authority, you're not, if you don't have the credibility to step in and be like, boom, no, you can't lay it on the altar, most people are going to walk away from you. But because he is who he says he is, I think that was really important to go over.
Agreed. Yeah, well said, Jay.
All right. Well, so now you're married with kids, and where are we?
Yeah. So we, after spending a year and a half in Hawaii, we moved back home to be on staff at Ken's church. And that was a dream come true. We got the call while we were in Hawaii. My wife was pregnant with twins. One of Ken's assistants, longtime assistants, had received a call from the Lord to move on. So Ken called and said, hey, we have a vacancy. Would you like to take this job? And me and my wife still joke about it. We both cried instantly. It was such a dream come true. So we came home, we took that job, and
You
I
left Hawaii for Maine.
I couldn't wait. I was wearing flannels, jeans, and boots the entire time in Hawaii. I'm like, what are you doing? It wasn't me. I mean, I'm grateful for that season, but it was, I'm a Mainer.
Yeah.
So I took that job in the summer of 2018, and I was content with staying there my whole life as long as the Lord tarried. And Ken was gracious. He gave me all kinds of opportunities, gave Maddie opportunities. Towards the end of our time there, Ken actually opened up one of the parsonages, right, Jay? We were living upstairs in the church.
He was actually living in the church.
I was living in the church.
Yeah.
So, which was such a cool circle. I mean, full circle. I mean, years before that, it used to be Ken and Jeanette's office before they turned it into an apartment. And it was in Ken's and Jeanette's office years ago that Ken had to tell me I was leaving the program. It then became my bedroom all those years later. So, God was so good. But 2020 happened. And this is Jay. We met in 2020. Obviously, the world the great deception went forward. Yep. And the world went on lockdown. Pastor Ken took a stance early, realizing what was happening, that pot shops and liquor stores were open, but the church couldn't be. Mm-hmm. So, Pastor Ken bravely and boldly and full of conviction opened the doors of the church. And it was in that same time where the only way I can best articulate it, and it was through a time of prayer and fasting. Ken had always asked us to do that around Easter time. So it was April 2020. The Lord impressed on my heart a sense of urgency. And by that, I mean, I had always wanted to be a preacher and a senior pastor. I was very intimidated by the idea of church planning, especially serving on staff of a very established church with a salary and housing. To leave that to go plant a church was very intimidating. So there was, maybe down the road one day God will allow me to serve in that role, but it just was something that didn't seem too near. And then 2020 hit, and it just a sense of urgency to launch out. And, through a chain of events, I really believe it was Portland, Maine, which is Maine's largest city, which is the greatest need just because of the amount of people. Very, 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 very liberal city, 2 hours south of Bangor. And so went to Ken, told him our plans, and within 3 months, June of 2020, me, my wife, and two of my assistants, who are also former graduates of the discipleship program, Andrew and Ryan, are both former heroin addicts that we met in the discipleship program. They prayed with me, and we agreed that we were going to rent this tiny little space, 1,500 square foot of space, right outside of Portland, put a bunch of chairs and a sound, system in there, and just start doing church. And the Lord just, in his genius, what makes no sense to plant a church in the time of a lockdown, especially when Governor Mills had 10-person caps of worship on all churches in the state of Maine. We opened the doors. We didn't mandate masks. We let people make their own decisions. And we didn't count. We didn't stop the 11th person from coming in. Within 2 months, we were having 70 people show up. Within 6 months, we're at 100, and we're thinking, goodness, we're going to 2 services. We started renting construction trailers to put the kids in. And it just grew quickly because we just did what was taught to us. We trusted in the Word of God. We taught it. Sunday mornings, we were in Matthew. Wednesdays, we're in the book of Genesis, all that time ago. And just making space for fellowship and doing life with people. We started an addiction meeting on Friday nights. And so now 2.5 years later, the Lord has just blessed it. He's blessed the teaching of his word. It's been incredible.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of pastors on here who don't necessarily share honestly. I mean, they're more careful about what they share. And I really admire your transparency just with your story. And it even your really low moments, and you're putting your shame to work for you. I heard that said somewhere, that God never wastes anything. And just throughout your story, how you've talked about him bringing back or redeeming the years the locusts have eaten, and how he's doing that now in your life is just, it's really inspiring and awesome to see.
Thanks, Melissa. It's a privilege to boast. And that's what Ken has always said, a privilege to boast on what God's done. And he uses the weak and the foolish things of this world to raise them up as a pattern and say, if I can change this knucklehead, I can change anybody. So it's a privilege.
That's right.
Well, I thought I had a thick skull, and then I met you, and third time's a charm. So God bless you, brother.
Yes.
It's so good to see you doing well. It's so good to see you thriving. I'm always watching and listening to see what you guys are doing on social media. And when I get the rare chance to talk to Ken, so again, brother, thank you so much for coming on
It's been
here
awesome.
and sharing your fearless testimony, which is, I knew would be powerful, and it was.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, guys. Love you so much, Jay. I hope to come down and see you, Lord willing, soon.
Next time you're anywhere, like I tell Ken, he's like, yeah, I was in North Carolina. I'm like, bro, you were 40 minutes away.
Yeah.
Right? I'm on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee. That's where I'm in Northeast Tennessee. But I will drive hours to go see you guys. So tell me where if you guys are anywhere within, a state range, let me know.
Consider it done, brother.
All right. Good seeing you.
All right.
Bye.
That's all we have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this extra long version. I mean, I couldn't get enough. I wish we had more time, but thank you so much. We will see you Friday. God bless.
God bless.